Okay, welcome to the people at home. We're going to be going over Chapter 6 today, which is called The Duel for North America. It is on your Google Classroom page underneath Unit 2. Again, there were about 5 chapters listed in Unit 2. And again, we're on Chapter 6, which is the last link of that subheading in Unit 2. And what we're basically doing today is for about a half an hour, we're going to go through at least however far we can get in the reading to go over how you should be taking notes and to start looking at how you should be taking information out of these chapters and how to determine, quite honestly, what is important and what is not. Now, looking at Chapter 6, the duel for North America, we have to ask ourselves, what is a duel? A challenge. What else? A fight, all right? Of course, probably the most famous duel is Hamilton and Burr. We'll talk about that this year, okay? But this is literally talking about how it's kind of a showdown for North America. And they pretty much right off the bat are going to tell you who the showdown is with, all right? So it starts off as the 17th century neared its sunset. A titanic struggle was shaping up for the mastery of the North American continent. The contest involved 3 Old World nations. Old World means what? Okay, back in what continent are they referring to? Europe. Okay, the European nations. And they name them off England, France, and Spain. Okay? Now, of course, they have a little subheading there, or asterisk, I should say, for England. And if you look down at the bottom, it says, after the union of England and Scotland in 1707, the nation's official name became Great Britain. So they're talking about how that is going to transition here. And by the time of the French and Indian War, England is now Great Britain. So they're kind of giving you that heads up, if you will. But England, France, and Spain, okay? Remember, we talked about 5 empires. By that point, the Dutch were on the decline, and the Portuguese had been screwed out of their land holdings. Anybody remember what treaty was involved with that? Why the Portuguese? Yes, Carol.
I don't know how to say it, but it's like the
Tordesillas.
Yeah.
Treaty of Tordesillas, yes. In the late 1400s, the Pope looked at a outdated map of the discovered territories, drew a line just for fun, not realizing that he basically screwed the Portuguese completely, okay? So those 2 nations, because of the Pope screwing Portugal and because the Dutch basically failed to guard against the encroachment of the English in what eventually becomes New York, both those had fallen off. Now we're talking about a struggle between 3 nations. And Spain arguably was on the decline at that point too, because they had misspent a lot of the gold and silver that they had brought in during their conquests over the 15 and 1600s. Okay, so in the early 1700s, they're really going to kind of struggle, and you'll kind of see that here in a second. And it unavoidably swept up Native American peoples as well. From 1688 to 1763, 4 bitter wars convulsed Europe. All 4 of those conflicts were world wars. They amounted to a death struggle for domination in Europe as well as in the New World, and they were fought on the waters and soil of 2 hemispheres. Counting these first 4 clashes, 9 world wars have been waged since 1688. The American people, whether as British subjects or as American citizens, proved unable to stay out of a single one of them. And one of those wars, known as the 7 Years' War in Europe, and sometimes as the French and Indian War in America, set the stage for America's independence. Now, out of that whole first paragraph, what's the information you need to get out of that? I'm sorry? Americans are problematic. How so? Okay, you could take that out. Why could I maybe argue against that? Is it just Americans they're talking about?
No.
They bring up a whole host of other people, whether it be European nations, native cultures, you name it. The whole point is this paragraph is not designed to relay information. What are they doing? setting it up, and providing an argument. Okay? So the AP style writing is trying to set up, what they're doing is modeling, if you will, a form of, kind of recap, if you will, framing the argument, and then they're telling you what the argument is. Okay? So they're basically setting up the idea that this is a showdown between European nations for control over North America. Okay? Now, they're going to start off with France finds a foothold. Now, if you're taking notes, you would take notes however you see fit. I have seen a number of you over prepping for this, where you're writing almost everything down. And then I've seen a few of you that are writing just a little too vague and not really getting the main points. And here's the thing, some of you immediately go and say, well, there's two bold terms, so I need to know those and nothing else. Well, if you can't explain the bold terms in the grand scheme of things, then what's the point of knowing the terms? Okay? At the same time, if you are writing, 4 paragraphs worth of notes for 4 paragraphs worth of writing, you didn't really take notes, you just rewrote the book in a different form. All right? And that's going to be very difficult for you to remember. Okay? So let's try and at least glean out of this the information that is necessary from this French section here. Okay? Like England and Holland, France was a latecomer in the scramble for New World real estate, and for basically the same reasons. It was convulsed during the 1500s by foreign wars and domestic strife, including the frightful clashes between Roman Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. So, by context clues, what is a Huguenot?
Another part of a Christian.
Okay, so what type of Christian are we talking about? A Protestant. So a Huguenot is a French Protestant. All right? So part of our notes should be, hey, they had a problem between Roman Catholics in France and Protestants, better known as Huguenots, in France as well. So who does that sound like? An argument between Roman Catholics and Protestants. What other nation was having that exact same problem? England, right? We talked about how England had the same issue, okay? They even move on to say on St. Bartholomew's Day in 1572, more than 10,000 Huguenots, men, women, and children, were butchered in cold blood. Okay, so they even had a massacre over this. They were so desperate to point out that their version of God was more important than somebody else that they killed for it. Now, for those of you that are Christians and have read the Bible, they're pretty explicit about the thou shalt not kill thing, right?
Yes.
Well, they kind of said, well, we're going to make an exception, and we're going to kill people anyway. Look, if you read your history books, God is the leading cause of death. Okay? Because there are a lot of religious wars that are out there. Okay? So do realize, and we're not just talking about the Christian God or the interpretation of it. We're talking about the Crusades, where you're fighting in between religions that actually pray to the same being. They just call it different names. Okay? So you have to be pretty committed to your religion to, decide to kill in the name of God, especially if you're killing in the name of the same God. It's a little confusing, but this happens, all right? Now, the next paragraph says, a new era dawned in 1598 when the Edict of Nantes, issued by the Crown, granted limited toleration to French Protestants. Okay, what is the Edict of Nantes then?
Is it like the act of toleration?
Very good. You're kind of getting the point here that hey, we're going to tolerate this. We're going to, but instead of tolerating Catholics, okay, and tolerating everybody else, this one is saying, hey, look, we're going to be fine with Protestants. We're done with this whole butchering of people. All right, and King Henri, it says the Crown, but it's King Henri IV who basically puts this out there and says, we are done with the bloodshed, no more. Okay. Because of this, according to the book, religious wars ceased, and in the new century, France blossomed into the mightiest and most feared nation on the European continent, led by a series of brilliant ministers and by the vainglorious King Louis XIV, who you learned about last year, okay? Putting into context at least. Enthroned as a 5-year-old boy, he reigned for no less than 72 years, from 1643 to 1715, surrounded by a glittering court and scheming ministers and mistresses. Fatefully, for North America, Louis XIV also took a deep interest in overseas colonies. Now, in that whole paragraph, if I'm writing notes to understand exactly what's going on, I might write Edict of Nantes equals religious peace. Okay? That's all you really need to get out of that. That, hey, they put this religious problem to bed right there where, hey, we're going to, Catholics, Protestant, doesn't matter, we're all French. And because of that peace, what are they now able to do? Prosper, right? They can find new ways. Look, instead of killing each other, let's go kill the British. You know, like we'll have different versions of it, but it will be prosperous for our country. Okay, so they unite and therefore become prosperous. After rocky beginnings, success finally rewarded the exertions of France in the New World. In 1608, the year after the founding of Jamestown, the permanent beginnings of a vast empire, see map 6-1, were established at Quebec, a granite sentinel commanding the St. Lawrence River. The leading figure was Samuel de Champlain, an intrepid soldier and explorer whose energy and leadership fairly earned him the title of Father of New France. Champlain entered into friendly relations, a fateful friendship, with a nearby Huron Indian tribe. At their request, he joined them in battle against their foes, the federated Iroquois tribes of the New York area. 2 volleys from the lightning sticks of the whites routed the terrified Iroquois, who left behind 3 dead and 1 wounded. France, to its sorrow, thus earned the lasting enmity of the Iroquois tribes. They thereafter hampered French penetration into the Ohio Valley, sometimes ravaging French settlements and frequently serving as allies of the British in the prolonged struggle for supremacy in the continent. All right, so what do we know about Champlain then? From the reading. Who is Samuel de Champlain? The father of New France, which is nice, but what does that mean in reality? I'm sorry? Don't know how to explain it. If he's the father of New France, what does that mean?
He's looking for more territory.
Okay, he's the one that kind of establishes a foothold. Okay, remember how we talked about Captain John Smith, and we talked about John Rolfe establishing Jamestown? Champlain's that version for the French. Now he makes a glaring error. Okay, he makes friends with the native tribe, but he probably made friends with the wrong one. Okay, he didn't realize it at the time. It's one of those things that certainly you look back afterwards in retrospect and say, hey, you messed up. The Huron tribe, which was a very powerful tribe in the area, becomes friends with them. But their natural enemy in that region was the Iroquois. What Champlain does not have the benefit of is knowledge that the Iroquois control more territory and are more organized. And they are going to, and this is one of those things, the reason you all don't speak French right now in this region is because the Iroquois prevented the French from coming into this territory. Okay, the French did not come in. Now, they came in as explorers and they came in as fur traders, but they were not settling in this area, and that's not for lack of effort. They tried. Okay, hence Detroit, Detroit. Okay, there's plenty of French names around here. Okay, so there was plenty of French influence in this region, but the Iroquois pretty much prevented them from especially going into what is today upstate New York. Okay, so the British, naturally, when they come in, they befriend the Iroquois right off the bat because they're the natural enemies of the French. Okay, now of course by doing so, what is that going to lay the seeds for? If I've got friends that don't like the other and you've got friends that don't like the other, we're going to have warfare, right? We're going to get involved in wars, okay? So that's kind of where you're getting the influence, if you will. Okay, the government of New France, or Canada, finally fell under the direct control of the king after various commercial companies had faltered or failed. This royal regime was almost completely autocratic. The people elected no representative assemblies, nor did they enjoy the right to trial by jury as in the English colonies. So, if you hear that, hey, this colony has fallen under the control of the king and it was autocratic, what does that mean about New France as compared to the English colonies? I'm sorry?
Were they thriving?
Okay, let me rephrase the question. What's happening in 1619 in Jamestown? Okay, slavery is established, but there was something else that happened in 1619.
There was like economic something or other, right? No?
This one was political.
Oh, the political, the House of
Keep going.
Burgess?
House of Burgess is established. Remember, these are the guys that are going to handle the local problems because the English don't want to deal with it. You know, it takes 3 months for them to get word about a problem and 3 months more to get the answer. So by the time you get the answer, especially if you're saying, hey, look, the natives are being a problem here, they might have attacked and killed half the settlement by the time they get the answer of what to do. Okay? So they set up the House of Burgesses to handle, and in a sense, you're not wrong when you said it was an economic decision because a lot of times they were doing the local economic policies. Okay? But again, it was this idea of local control. You handle your own business here, and we'll handle the bigger picture problems in regards to the colonies over in England. France is not doing that. New France is under autocratic regime. So what does that mean? King controls everything. There is no representative assembly. There is no House of Burgesses. They tell you in here, there's no trial by jury. It's that whatever the king says, that's how it is. So why does that matter? Aren't our colonies going to eventually scream and yell about our natural rights and how they're being denied us? That same feeling is not going to happen in France, or in what is today Canada, okay? They're not going to have the same, you do realize, we'll talk about this, but at one point we do have visions of Canada being the 14th colony, okay? We want to take it over and make it part of the English colonies. This is before even the Revolutionary War. And even during the Revolutionary War, one of the first things we do is we try and invade Canada to get them on our side, thinking, oh, they'll just jump to the cause. They don't. They actually fight against us. Okay? Because they're just like, well, we're not on the same side. We like our king. We like our government. We're fine with it. We couldn't understand why they didn't see the natural rights and see the problems. Well, they don't. They never had them. Okay? We did, and we'll kind of talk about that when we talk about revolutionary mentality, okay? Finally, the section finishes off, the population of Catholic New France grew at a listless pace. As late as 1750, only 60,000 or so whites inhabited New France. Landowning French peasants, unlike the dispossessed English tenant farmers who embarked for the British colonies, had little economic motive to move. Protestant Huguenots, who might have had religious motive to migrate, were denied a refuge in this raw colony. The French government in any case favored its Caribbean island colonies, rich in sugar and rum, over the snow-cloaked wilderness of Canada. So, there's a lot of things out of there that you could pick out, but what I would probably focus on is there's probably 3 reasons why Canada did not prosper population-wise. What's one of them? Okay, well, it's cold, all right. 3 reasons why Canada didn't prosper when it came to population. Because as we're growing down in the 13 colonies in population, Canada is not. Because notice they said by 1750, there's only 60,000 people.
They weren't allowed to move.
Okay, who wasn't allowed to move? Okay, the French Huguenots really weren't allowed to go. Okay, because notice they even started off the section with Catholic New France, okay? They didn't want the religious issues over here. So even though we had the Edict of Nantes, which tolerated, there's a difference between toleration and acceptance, okay? It's not like they're opening, oh, my Protestant brethren. No, they're you over there, we'll ignore your existence and let you live, but other than that, we're going to Catholic Mass, you're going to your church, and we're not going to talk about it. That's toleration, okay? Acceptance is, hey, it's good to see you, You come to my church, I go to yours, it doesn't matter. That's acceptance. They're not doing that. So yes, the religious issue is still a problem, okay, especially when it comes to settlement. What are some other things that are preventing it? Explain economically how it's a problem.
They couldn't exactly make any money because
Okay, the purpose of the colony may not be agricultural, like many of the colonies in the 13 English colonies. They're not focused on that. Remember our session where we were going through primogeniture and we were talking about how, you know, some people inherited the lands, but then I'm sending Chucky over to the New World. You know, there's no push factor. The French don't have that where you're pushing people out and making it economically necessary for somebody to go over and start anew within this colony, okay? And if we're going to keep going with economics, the other thing is they have other colonies. And where are the other colonies? The French. They say it at the end of the paragraph, folks. In the Caribbean. And what are they making there? Sugar, which is making them money, okay? That's where they're making bank, okay? So Canada doesn't have the same resources, okay? This predominantly because it's cold, so we'll throw that in, okay? They don't have the same resources, so therefore they're focused more on how do we hold on to what eventually becomes Haiti and some other of the island colonies because that's where the sugar is, okay?
Are they involved in like any like traders or whatever? Because like we had like the triangular trade, but like you know,
They are involved, yes, they are involved in the trade, okay? Now, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of mercantilism down the way here, so it's more complex than that. But yeah, you're on the right track. Trade's going to have a lot to do with that. Okay, the next section it talks about New France fans out. Okay, so we're still on France. New France did contain one valuable resource, the beaver. European fashion settlers valued beaver pelt hats for their warmth and opulent appearance. To adorn the heads of Europeans, French fur trappers ranged over the woods and waterways of North America in pursuit of the beaver. These colorful coureurs de bois, or runners of the woods, were also runners of risks. Two-fisted drinkers, free spenders, free livers, and lovers. They littered the land with scores of place names, including Baton Rouge, Terre Haute, Des Moines, and Grand Teton. Singing, paddle-swinging French voyageurs also recruited Indians into the fur business. The Indian fur flotilla arrived in Montreal in 1693, numbered 4,000 canoes, but the fur trade had some disastrous drawbacks. Indians recruited into the fur business were decimated by white man's diseases and debauched by his alcohol. Slaughtering beaver by the boatload also violated many Indians' religious beliefs and sadly demonstrated the shattering effect that contact with the Europeans wreaked on traditional Indian ways of life. All right, so we already have those issues. What are we getting out of this? The beaver actually made New France profitable, okay? And it was all because of fashion, okay? Say what you want about French fashion, but it's definitely driving the economy at that point, okay? Of course, it has detrimental effects on the natives of those regions because they get involved in it, and obviously then we go back to the first contact issues we talked about with both the Spanish and the English. French have the same problem. First contact spreads disease. First contact kills off Native American tribes. First contact kills off Native American ways of life. Because let's be honest, if the native hunters were going out and killing animals for food, and now they're going out to kill them just to trade, you've switched their economy. You've switched their way of life, okay? So unintended consequences are there. Now, of course, the bigger unintended consequence is going to be talked about in the next section. Pursuing the sharp-toothed beaver ever deeper into the heart of the continent, the French trappers and their Indian partners hiked, rode, snowshoed, sailed, and paddled across amazing distances. They trekked in a huge arc across the Great Lakes into present-day Saskatchewan and Manitoba, along the valleys of the Platte, the Arkansas, and the Missouri, west of the Rockies and south of the border with Spanish Texas. In the process, they all but extinguished the beaver population in many areas, inflicting incalculable ecological damage. Okay? So by killing off all these beaver, why is that going to cause an ecological disaster?
Because you're out of beaver and then you got pots and stuff, right?
Well, what do the beavers typically do?
Build dams.
They build dams, right? They dam up rivers. Okay? So, and this is usually something that allows for, rivers to not spill over their banks, the beavers are kind of nature's way of controlling rivers and controlling the flow of water and things like that. They're not doing that anymore. So those old beaver dams are going to fail, okay? They're not being maintained by the beaver, so anybody that's downstream from it is going to have a flood, okay? And it's going to cause issues, especially on mighty rivers, okay? So you're going to have those issues because the beaver are not there. They're messing with the chain, the food chain, if you will, okay? The French Catholic missionaries, notably the Jesuits, labored zealously to save the Indians for Christ and from fur trappers. Some of the Jesuit missionaries, their efforts scorned, suffered unspeakable tortures at the hands of the Indians. But though they made few permanent converts, the Jesuits played a vital role as explorers and geographers. Other explorers sought neither souls nor fur, but empire. To thwart English settlers pushing into the Ohio Valley, Antoine Cadillac founded Detroit, or Detroit. Okay, not surprisingly, Cadillac and Detroit, two names that are kind of intertwined not just in history, but in the auto industry. Okay, the city of Straits in 1701, to check Spanish penetration into the region of the Gulf of Mexico, ambitious Robert de La Salle, that should sound familiar around this area, La Salle, floated down the Mississippi in 1682 to the point where it mingles with the Gulf. He named the great interior basin Louisiana in honor of his sovereign Louis XIV. Dreaming of empire, he returned to the Gulf 3 years later with a colonizing expedition of 4 ships, but he failed to find the Mississippi Delta, landed in Spanish Texas, and in 1687 was murdered by his mutinous men. Undismayed, French officials persisted in their efforts to block Spain on the Gulf of Mexico. They planted several fortified posts in what was now Mississippi and Louisiana, the most important of which was New Orleans, or New Orleans. Commanding the mouth of the Mississippi River, the strategic semi-tropical outposts also tapped the fur trade in huge interior valley. The fertile Illinois country, where the French established forts and trading posts at Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes, became the garden of France's North American empire. Surprising amounts of grain were floated down the Mississippi for shipment to the West Indies and to Europe. All right. That whole section, they go through quite a bit about the French, and they kind of gloss over the French Empire pretty quickly. Who are the Jesuits? Missionaries, okay? Now, they kind of gloss over it about, hey, and they also served as explorers. They were explorers. These were people that were going out and trying to make contact with Native American tribes, and they were trying to beat the fur traders to them. They were trying to kind of meet up with these people so they could see that the French were coming in peace. The sad thing is some of these missionaries met up with tribes that had already met with white men, and these white men had not treated them well. So yes, there were Jesuit priests that were murdered, sacrificed by native tribes for the sins of previous white men to come into their region. That's not to say there weren't, good people. That's not to say that there weren't missionaries that found success, but it was, again, a little dicey at this point because the French are expanding and making contact, and not all those contacts are good, okay? So some missionaries, of course, did have some success. And outside of this, you guys have heard of the names Marquette and Joliet, okay? Marquette, maybe. There's a university named after Marquette up in Wisconsin. They explored the Mississippi River and named a lot of places along the way, and we're talking about Marquette being a Jesuit, being somebody that was kind of going out there trying to save souls, okay? Now, he counted as an explorer as well, but again, it's kind of a byproduct of them trying to be a missionary to these native tribes, bringing Jesus to the natives, okay? So they're very similar. And what empire are they sounding similar to with this idea that, yes, we want the economy, but we also want to spread God's, the Word of God? What other European nation had that same mentality? Well, England, not as much. Okay, Spain, definitely. The 3 Gs, gold, God, and glory. Okay? So France is still, they're just as conflicted by this. You got people that are obviously fur traders. They're not worried about, spreading any sort of gospel or anything. But then you have Jesuit missionaries that aren't interested in beaver, but they are interested in trying to, spread the religious message. Now, they continue on. They talk about Cadillac. They talk about, I want to make sure I get everybody here. They talk about Cadillac. They talk about De La Salle. They talk about the founding of New Orleans in Louisiana. The main thing to get out of this, if you're taking notes, is the French managed to pretty much secure the Mississippi River. Okay, now why is that a big deal? I'm sorry? Trade, absolutely. So now you can link Canada with their West Indies colonies, their island colonies within the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. So you've got that link now. But how is that also going to be an issue? Taking the Mississippi, who'd they say they were bumping into? The Spanish, right? Spanish Texas. So remember when you were talking last year in World Studies and you were talking about imperialism and everybody was landing in Africa and taking over pieces and parts of Africa without really consulting the Africans? Okay, eventually there were wars. Why? Germany would show up, start expanding. France would show up, start expanding. And eventually, they ran into each other. This is our land. No, this is our land. And they'd fight. Well, the same thing's happening here. We claim this territory. Well, we claim this territory. Well, it's mine. No, it's mine. You guys have been around your siblings, many of you, enough to know territory matters. If you've ever had to share a room with a sibling, okay, not exactly the easiest thing in the world to do. Well, that's the same thing's happening here. Just imagine right now if you have a sibling, if your parents came in and said, hey, we are going to redo the basement. We're going to make it into a theater. We're going to make it into a game room type deal. And you and your brother or sister are going to share that territory. Now, on the surface, your parents are thinking, oh man, I just spent money to build this nice new rec room for my children. And you just heard there's games and movies. How do I take it for myself and my friends as opposed to my brother or sister? How can I divide it up and conquer as best I can? That's what these European nations are doing. Instead of settling this territory and trying to keep the peace between them, they're trying to claim everything they possibly can. And here's the other thing. Eventually, if the English start from their 13 colonies along the eastern seaboard, if they start moving into the interior, who now are they going to eventually bump into? Spain and France. So doesn't that link up to what they initially said, that there are going to be 3 empires and they're all going to have issues? Why? They're going to bump into each other. They're going to overlap on trade routes. They're going to fight over this stuff. This is what sets up the clash of the empires, which is the next section. Okay? Now, is everybody noticing what I'm taking out of the text here? I'm not trying to remember everything, but I'm taking out little tidbits that explain the overall picture. So I don't want to take up more than a half an hour of your time. You guys are busy, and quite honestly, me reading to you may be exceptionally boring, especially out of a textbook. Okay? But here's the point. I have had at least 5 people email me and say, hey, on these quizzes, I'm confused as to where you're getting your information from. This is kind of my main point with this. Out of what we've read, did I make a big deal about every single bold-faced term? Why? Just because the book says they're important doesn't mean that they fit into the overall narrative. Okay? What am I focusing on? The changes. Okay? The turning points. The things that look, nothing against coureurs de bois or voyagers. That's just explorers. They're going into the woods to find beavers. Great. Okay. What's the more important thing? The beaver. Okay? They're killing beavers for the fashion trade. That's how New France gets founded and actually is prosperous. The same thing holds true with Jamestown. It's prosperous because of tobacco. Okay? So again, it's one thing to remember these terms, I grant you that, but unless they make a big deal about it, like Detroit is going to be important down the line, but it's not important right at this moment. Okay? New Orleans is going to be important down the line. Okay? It's important at this moment because it's a trade route. They take great pains to tell you, hey, this is how they linked up with their colonies. Okay? So again, that's kind of the whole purpose of what we're doing here. And you have not that much really left in the chapter comparative to the other chapters. So you're talking about, let's see, about 12 more pages in the chapter, and a lot of it is maps and visuals. If you have questions, and this is definitely for the people at home as well, if you have questions over this, reach out, ask during office hours, okay? Email me. You know, if you want, and I've already had somebody do this in the other class, they took a picture of their notes that they were taking from reading the chapter and said, is this too much, not enough? Where am I at? And I went through and said, you've got a lot of fluff here. You got a lot of things that you're just writing down. If there's no real purpose to what you're writing down, it's probably not going to show up on a test or a quiz. Okay? And I realize that's tough for you to decipher what is and what is not important, but notice what I kept on stressing as I was going through. I was skipping over even boldface words if they didn't fit the overall narrative. Okay? That's really what the AP test does, is it sticks to a pretty strong storyline, especially when you're going along and then it turns and goes a different direction. So they're big on turning points. Okay? Yes, Chuck?
There's going to be a test of this up on Friday, right?
On Friday, yes. You will have a quiz over, quite honestly, a lot of the wars. Okay? So when they kind of come in and talk about King William's War, which was also known as Queen Anne's War, like they're pretty much together. They're fighting over the same stuff. They fight one war and then resolve it, but realize they never actually resolved anything. The war's so nice they fought it twice. Okay? War of Jenkins Ear, which is just ridiculous in its own right. It sounds just as stupid as the title gives you. And then King George's War, which was pretty serious. And then they move on and talk about the 7 Years' War, better known as the French and Indian War over here. And of course, that's the majority of the rest of the chapter. Okay?
And it's just going to be over chapter 6.
Just chapter 6. Okay? Because do realize the French and Indian War is very consequential. Okay? Look, if you would have asked somebody in 1754, somebody living in New York or somebody living in Pennsylvania, what nationality are you? They would have said British. Nobody was calling themselves an American. It didn't exist. You were an American colonist, but you're a British citizen. Okay? By the tail end of the war, you start getting the seeds for what eventually will come to that, where you start getting that revolutionary mentality. Now, nobody in 1763, at the tail end of the French and Indian War, is saying, oh, well, that's it, I'm an American. But it's going to start the process towards it. Okay, the French and Indian War and the effects are what kind of gradually build up and crescendo to become the revolutionary spirit of 1776. Okay, and the question that the AP test loves to ask is what changed in 13 years to where we're proud British citizens in 1763 at the end of the French and Indian War to all of a sudden we're rebelling in 1776 and writing a breakup letter to the king. Okay? So again, it's just 13 years, which I know seems like a long time to people your age, but as you grow up, you start realizing 13 years really isn't that long. Okay, my oldest daughter right now is 11 years old. It hasn't been that long since I held her for the first time. Okay, and it's amazing how things will change very quickly over a short period of time. Okay, and that's what has fascinated historians from the word go here is how in the world did we change our mentality that quickly? Okay, which of course we'll be talking about. Now again, as you're going through the French and Indian War, if you are confused by something, especially if you're confused by the other wars as well, because they kind of gloss through them. We can certainly talk about them as we go through the week. Okay, now to give you an idea for the week, I have not forgotten, Ms. Cash, your request about the Salem witch trials. I'm going to talk about that either tomorrow or Thursday, depending upon your schedule. Okay, I have not forgotten to do that because I do want to talk about the Great Awakening, talk about some religious craziness, if you will. So we're going to talk about that, at least to give you a mindset of what's going on in the colonies before these wars. But if you have questions, if you're reading this and you're just like, all right, the War of Jenkins Ear, what? That's the time to ask. Okay, so when we have our sessions, please ask. All right, and people at home, same deal. If you have questions, please ask. Office hours are always open and email is always available. And of course, you guys actually see me every day. So All right, I'm gonna stop the video here.